29 November 1921. 10,000 people gather in Haifa, more than a quarter of the city's population. It is an unprecedented funeral, bringing together Jews, Christians, Muslims, and the Druze. This diverse multitude is united in grief, in love, in adoration, for one whose eyes had always looked with loving kindness upon friend and foe alike, one whose feet walked tirelessly the path of service to humanity, one whose house always had an open door, one who was the solace of hearts. That man was Abbás Effendi, also known as Abdu'l-Bahá, the servant of the glory. Abdu'l-Bahá was born in 1844 in Persia and enjoyed a privileged childhood. But then, his father, Baha'u'llah, the prophet founder of the Bahá'í faith, was banished for his religious beliefs. In the depth of winter, Baha'u'llah, accompanied by some family and followers, was first exiled from Persia to Baghdad in the neighboring Ottoman Empire. They endured bitter cold and snow-swept mountains. Though just 9 years old, Abdu'l-Bahá comforted his fellow exiles. Before long, there was more banishment to Constantinople, to Adrianople, and finally, the harshest prison colony in the Ottoman Empire, Akko. 1868. Akko is a desolate city with a detestable climate and dark, narrow, filthy streets. The prisoners are marched through a hostile crowd and thrown into prison cells. When typhoid strikes, the exiles are not allowed a physician. Abdu'l-Bahá, now 24 years old, nurses more than 60 fellow prisoners back to health, though he himself becomes critically ill. Abbás Effendi's sacrificial care wins over the authorities, and a physician is allowed to care for the exiles. In time, Abbás Effendi's generosity of spirit, selfless service, and adherence to his principles endeared him to those who came to know him, and, in time, won over even the most cold-hearted of enemies. The authorities relaxed the conditions of his imprisonment, and Abbás Effendi's life of service enters a new stage. Abdu'l-Bahá continues to protect his father and take care of his followers. He tends to the sick and the poor in the city. In Akko, there is no hospital. Abdu'l-Bahá inquires about the welfare of the ill and needy. He then hires a doctor, Dr. Nikolai Bey, to look after the very poor. Dr. Nikolai is under instructions not to disclose the identity of his benefactor. Winter in Akko is unforgiving. The cold knives through thinly clad bodies. Hundreds each year receive cloaks from Abdu'l-Bahá. He himself places a garment on the shoulders of those who are weak, adjusting it with his own hands, gently saying, "There, now you will do well." Baha'u'llah passes away in 1892 and appoints Abdu'l-Bahá as his successor. Through the years, Abdu'l-Bahá, still as prisoner of the Ottoman Empire, not only guides the Bahá'í faith, he also continues to care for his neighbors. 1908. The Young Turk Revolution liberates religious and political prisoners. Abdu'l-Bahá, for the first time in 55 years, breathes the air of freedom. In 1912, he organizes an extensive agricultural operation, harvesting a great supply of wheat, corn, and vegetables. The wheat is stored in underground pits. 1914. World War I breaks out. The people of Haifa are threatened by blockade and famine. Death and starvation haunt every corner. Abdu'l-Bahá distributes the wheat to those in need, regardless of religion or race. For his great work in the interests of peace, conciliation, and the prosperity of the people, In 1920, he is knighted by the British government as Sir Abbás Effendi, a title he never used. Abbás Effendi said, "No name, no title, no mention, no commendation have I, nor will ever have, except Abdu'l-Bahá, servant of the glory. This is my longing. This is my greatest yearning. This is my eternal life. This is my everlasting glory." As the head of the Bahá'í faith for 29 years, Abdu'l-Bahá wrote voluminously, interpreting the teachings of Baha'u'llah, brought into being the first stages of a global Bahá'í community, and welcomed the first pilgrims from around the world to Akko and Haifa. Though now growing old, Abdu'l-Bahá traveled extensively in the West, in synagogues, churches, temples, on university campuses. Everywhere he tirelessly proclaimed the oneness of humankind. He condemned all forms of prejudice, religious, racial, class, national, and promoted the equality of woman and man. Abdu'l-Bahá is the perfect exemplar of Baha'u'llah's teachings in action, and an enduring model that every Baha'i strives to emulate. Abdu'l-Bahá designed the first gardens at Bahji, preparing the visitors to approach the shrine of Baha'u'llah. He worked on the initial construction of the Shrine of the Bab and envisaged 19 monumental terraces, rising from the foot of Mount Carmel to the Shrine of the Bab and continuing to the top of the mountain. Abbás Effendi passed away in Haifa in 1921. Even at the hour of his death, when his night robe needed changing, none could be found, as he had given them all away. Then that huge funeral procession, thousands of neighbors united in grief and loss, carried him up Mount Carmel and laid him to rest temporarily in one of the chambers of the Shrine of the Bab. 100 years have passed, and now Abbás Effendi will return to his home, Akko, where a shrine is being built in his honor. This is the wish come true, as he had told an early believer of his desire, to be buried under the sands between Haifa and Akko. This shrine will be a place of tranquility, beauty, and spirituality, as are all of the Baha'i holy places and gardens in Akko and Haifa. Just as with his funeral procession, everyone will be welcomed there. The design of the shrine seeks to manifest Abbás Effendi's life of service, selflessness, wisdom, openness, acceptance, kindness, and love for all people. A love that melts all opposition. A love that conquers all foes. A love that sweeps away all barriers. A love that aboundeth in charity. A love that triumphs over all obstacles. It is this love which shelters all mankind,